Leaders of the Pacific Islands have issued a declaration for an ocean of peace at a summit in the Solomon Islands. It urges global powers to respect the sovereignty as cracks within the bloc appear over China's growing influence in its strategically vital region. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese says the Fiji-backed push cements the region's cohesion and desire for peace and climate action. Solomon Islands leader Jeremiah Manele also vowing to never let the island's territory get caught in the mix of great power rivalry. High on the agenda of this year's meeting is the creation of a new climate fund. The Pacific Resilience Facility is set to be finalised to become the first Pacific-led owned and managed financing system.
Climate change is a global circumstance. We need to be not just take action ourselves, we need to encourage positive actions for others as well. And in the Pacific, we need to provide support for our Pacific family members.
Canberra also under pressure to secure hosting rights for the COP31 climate summit. Pacific Islands Forum leaders have endorsed Australia's bid, seeing it as a way to amplify the voices of vulnerable nations. Another top concern for Mr. Albanese is regional security after failing to secure a long-awaited deal with Vanuatu. Well, with members of the Pacific Islands Forum wedged between China and the West. Attendance this year, very different. Nearly 24 donor partners, including the US and China, are missing. The host, Solomon Islands, making the call after a dispute over Taiwan. Honiara had originally planned to only exclude the self-ruled island, but toned down the rules after fingers were pointed at Chinese involvement. Instead, it excluded all external partners to show an even hand. Beijing has steadily gained ground diplomatically in the region. Taiwan now has just 3 Pacific allies, half the number it had in 2019. Solomon Islands was the first to flip cutting ties in 2019, followed days later, Kiribati followed days later, while Nauru switched last year, 2 days after the Taiwanese President William Lai took office. Pacific leaders have been clear about their priorities, trade, investment and development, and China responded. It's now the second largest bilateral donor, surpassing the United States. Australia remains the largest. Now, China's largest grant so far, a $135 million road upgrade in Fiji. Other major projects span Vanuatu, Papua New Guinea and the Solomons. Taiwan, constrained by budget, focuses instead on health and agriculture. Beijing's growing diplomatic and economic footprint is matched by an increased military presence. In February, it held live-fire naval exercises in the Tasman Sea, the first in those waters. And last September, it tested an intercontinental ballistic missile over the Pacific, its first such test in international waters since 1980. Strategically, the Pacific is a key maritime gateway. It's also rich in natural resources, and the island nations account for more than 6% of the UN, a significant weight in multilateral decisions. The Solomon Islands has rapidly deepened ties with China, but it was a 2022 security pact that sounded alarms in the West. Though the final deal remains secret, a leaked draft suggests Beijing could deploy military and law enforcement personnel if agreed. China says it seeks no sphere of influence and has no interest in geopolitical competition. Despite the tensions, climate change remains the Pacific's top priority and greatest security threat. In July, the World Court ruled in a case led by Vanuatu that states are legally obligated to combat the crisis. Now, Pacific nations are pushing for more climate justice, more funding for biodiversity loss, and an effective disaster recovery fund. Leaders have also issued an Ocean of Peace declaration. Now, it aims to reinforce regional commitments to prevent militarization, protect oceans, and maintain stability. The Pacific Islands Forum has long shaped the region's direction on development and diplomacy. But even as this year's talks conclude, the waters ahead remain uncertain amid growing power politics at play. Well, we have more now on this topic. Stephen Howes, Professor and Director of Development Policy Centre at the Australian National University, joins us. Professor, first, hard to ignore those big divides that we just heard about that align member countries with either Australia, the US or China. How is that likely to play out at the forum that's meant to unite Pacific nations?
Well, good evening. And I think you gave the right summary, that it's really a dispute between China and Taiwan. And we definitely see the rising influence of the People's Republic of China and the declining influence of Taiwan. And as you mentioned, it used to be just 5 years ago, 6 Pacific Island countries recognized Taiwan. Now it's down to only 3, and 3 of the very smallest. And so this dispute did arise this year about China not wanting Taiwan to take part in the donors meeting. So the regular Pacific Islands Forum meeting is going ahead. The question was about the donors meeting. And the compromise was, we just won't have a donors meeting. And it's true, some Pacific Island forums countries aren't happy about that. But at the same time, it's also important to recognise China didn't get what it wanted either. China wanted to have the donors meeting without Taiwan. So it was a compromise. And I think in a way it's a compromise that, being a compromise, not everyone's going to be happy with it, but it was a compromise that speaks to the ability of the Pacific Island Forum to stay together and to stay united in a challenging time.
That's interesting because, the Solomon Islands having barred all parties, including China and Taiwan. Surely that says something still about China's intentions when it comes to shaping institutions and agendas in the Pacific Island and perhaps even setting the stage for expanding military presence there.
Well, it definitely says that, China doesn't like countries recognizing Taiwan. And we know that's a very sensitive issue for China. But if you step back beyond that China-Taiwan dispute, the Pacific Island Forum is a very pro-Western kind of forum, actually. There are 18 members. 2 of them are Australia and New Zealand, of course, allied with the US. You've got 3 compact states, Palau, FSM, Marshall Islands, in a very tight military agreement with the US. You've got 2 that are in a special relationship with New Zealand. You've got 2 French colonies. You've got 2 that are have a special security arrangement with Australia. So that's 11 out of the 18 that are in some kind of alliance with the West. And Australia in particular has been stepping up its efforts with the remaining 7. They're more in the non-aligned category. They're not pro-China, anti-Australia. They have more the philosophy, friends to all, enemies to none. But even in that minority group of non-aligned group, Australia is about to sign a security agreement with PNG. It's trying to sign an agreement with Vanuatu. It's announced that it's going to negotiate an agreement with Fiji. So actually, Australia's been very active. And I'd say China's somewhat right now on the back foot.
Oh, that's interesting that you should say that. There was, earlier in our package, we heard a lot of debate of how the Belt and Road Initiative plays into the politics of this all and how likely countries that take large loans from China are likely to fall into a death trap. There was not much disagreement. What is your viewpoint? Not much agreement.
Well, there's certainly the same debate. Yeah, there's the same debate in the Pacific, but I think Pacific countries, like in ASEAN, Pacific countries need infrastructure. And they, apart from the 3 very small ones that that recognise Taiwan, most Pacific countries want to engage with China on an economic level. There's no doubt about that. And China's a trading partner, and it has become a creditor to some of these countries. But, that's not surprising. Of course, China's an important economic partner for just about every country in the world. So I think it's not surprising that the Pacific is seeking a deeper relationship with China. It's not surprising that China's influence is growing. But on the security front, we do need to step back. And if you actually just look at where countries ally themselves, what the Pacific countries are saying, I think it is a bit of a beat up, really, to say that China is gaining a security foothold or it's gaining strategic advantage. In fact, there's been a big pushback by the US, Australia and New Zealand And they're actually the ones who are now signing security agreements with the Pacific.
Yeah, interesting. One of the things that was wanting to come out of the summit was what they're calling the Ocean of Peace Declaration. What does that look like on the ground in practical terms for the region, or is it largely, symbolic?
Yeah, I would say it's largely symbolic, because you could call the Pacific an ocean of peace, but then you've got Australia and New Zealand, part of the Pacific, in an alliance with the US. And especially you've got these three compact states. They have a very militarized alliance with the US. The US uses them as military bases. And they're part of the Pacific Islands Forum, a part of the Pacific. So to talk about, we all hope the Pacific will be an ocean of peace, but I don't think this agreement, is actually going to have much traction on the ground. Each country approaches their security in a bilateral way. I don't think that the forum really has that much influence when it comes to the security arrangements that countries make.
All right, fascinating stuff. Thank you so much, Stephen Howes there, Professor and Director of the Development Policy Centre at the Australian National University. Thanks again.